not afraid to get cold or wet, because I think you're going to get one of the two this evening. We've been talking about Daniel here for the last 2 Sundays. This is our third class, and we'll go 2 or 3 more before we finish up with the book. And once again, this is a Bible class, so I encourage you to, if you got any questions or comments, anything that you might want to share with the group, please feel free to. I want to let everybody have an opportunity. Many people have studied this book many more times even than I have, so you certainly have some insights that I may not, and I would like to hear from you. This morning we were discussing the idea of God's providence, how God provides for his people. And if you do a study of Daniel and you're honest with yourself, Daniel is a book of providence. God shows providence almost everywhere we see in Scripture, but certainly in the case of Daniel and his 3 friends, God's providence is evidently on display. I think also we have to realize, if one of the other lessons that we can take away from the book of Daniel is the idea that our example is paramount, is it not? Would you agree with that? If you look at the example that Daniel and his 3 friends set for the various kings that they served, their example was extremely important in how they were able to make the most of the situation they were in. As a matter of fact, even the lessons that we teach young children in regards to what we find in the book of Daniel in regards to our behavior and the example that we set, whether it's through the Daniel in the lion's den, Daniel refusing to abide by the king's decree in regards to his prayer, or if it is the example of the Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego being tossed into the furnace, and we'll talk about that this evening, for their refusal to bow down to the golden image that Nebuchadnezzar had erected. Whatever it is, their example was of paramount importance when we read the book of Daniel. And I think we need to realize that. But there are other lessons, of course, to be learned from the book. We'll talk about that tonight. Chapter 2, verse 47. Somebody turn to chapter 2, verse 47. And just read that for me. This is, of course, what's just happened in Acts 2:47. What's just occurred. Yes, there's been a dream that's been, Daniel has been given, all 4 of these young men have been given various gifts. The big ones that we know, of course, are the idea that God gave them skill, he gave them wisdom, he gave them knowledge, so that when they were set to the work that they were set to, they accomplished it with great skill. So much so that they were highly regarded by the king. When they were brought before him, they were highly regarded. Daniel, however, was given an extra set of skills. And what were those skills? Interpretation of dreams and visions. And part of half of the book of Daniel is in regards to the happenings in the courts of the various kings that they served. But the other half is an account of the dreams and visions that Daniel himself had. And, what was where was the benefit in Daniel being able to interpret these dreams? No one else was able to. Nebuchadnezzar was furious that his wise men were unable to divine. As a matter of fact, he is very shrewd in how he dealt with them. He said, not only do I want you to interpret the dream, I want you to tell me the dream and interpret the dream. He was trying to prove them. He would not want to be defrauded when it comes to this dream. This was a dream that haunted him, and he wanted to know the meaning of it. He had probably had several other visions in his own mind, not necessarily sent from God, but things that he wanted interpreted. Most pagan religions are very superstitious, so he probably saw many things that he felt needed to be interpreted. But this one haunted him greatly. It distressed him. His sleep went out from him. He wanted to know what was going on with this dream. So it was through God's providence, of course, God's providence, that Daniel was in the court of the king, and Daniel was able to interpret this dream. And it's interesting that even though it was a dream that, in which case Nebuchadnezzar was widely considered himself, and others considered him to be almost godlike, but he was still happy enough to hear his dream interpreted, even though it would come about that he was not going to keep his kingdom forever. one of the ways that they would address him is, "O king, live forever." And he realized through the interpretation of this dream that he was not going to live forever and he was not going to keep his kingdom forever, but he still was appreciative of the fact that Daniel was able to interpret this dream, even though he didn't come out perfectly. He didn't come out basically on the winning side. His kingdom eventually would go, his kingdom would be replaced with, Daniel said it would be replaced actually with an inferior kingdom. But he was still glad to hear that. And I think the idea here, or one of the things we could take away from this is, if we think about the idea of being able to interpret dreams and visions, in order for a dream or vision to be interpreted, it has to be interpreted correctly. Otherwise, it doesn't mean anything to the person it's been delivered to. But we could take that in regards to the New Testament church, the first century church. Remember, what was the command that was handed down in regards to those who were able to speak in tongues? It says, if there's any of you can speak in tongues, tongues are not supposed to be spoken unless what? There's somebody that can interpret it. Therefore, you avoid any impropriety and you avoid any fraud on behalf of the person. And if no one can interpret it, it doesn't benefit anyone. Well, much like the dreams that Nebuchadnezzar was having, they weren't going to benefit anybody unless they could be interpreted. They certainly weren't going to benefit Nebuchadnezzar. So after Daniel's interpreted this dream in chapter 2, the king acknowledges Daniel's God. But look, what does he say in chapter 2, verse 47? Someone read that.
The king answered Daniel and said, "Truly, your God is the God of gods, the Lord of kings, and a revealer of secrets, since you could reveal the secret." Okay. The king acknowledges Daniel's God, but if you look at what he said, he is the God of gods. So where's Nebuchadnezzar's heart still? It's in idolatry, right? It's in a multi-god universe. Nebuchadnezzar himself is dwelling in a multi-god universe. He acknowledges Daniel's God as giving him the power, but he still acknowledges Daniel's God as a God above gods, not the God, not the only God, not Jehovah God. He is a God of gods. So Nebuchadnezzar's heart is still not turned to God yet, but he's on his way. He's begun his journey in regards to acknowledging the God that Daniel and his friends serve, Jehovah God. He's on his way to acknowledging Jehovah as God, the God that we understand, the God that they served. But at this point, he's still not quite there in his journey yet. This is evidence, of course, in his construction of this golden image. He builds this golden image, and it's kind of an interesting thing that he would do something like this after being told. I wonder if part of his idea of erecting this golden statue, if you remember the statue that was broken to pieces, who was at the top? Who was considered the head of that statue? It was him, right? His was the golden kingdom. His was the kingdom of Babylon. It was a wondrous kingdom. It truly was. It was beautiful. They were responsible for a great deal that people would consider that to be almost a golden age. And when he realized, of course, that he was the head of this statue in the gold, I wonder if it's any coincidence that he erects this golden statue. He sees himself. It doesn't say that the statue was of himself. It could have been a manufacture of one of the Babylonian gods, but it doesn't change the fact that he still had not accepted God, Jehovah God, as worthy of the worship. He erects this golden statue. And just reading really quickly, Nebuchadnezzar, chapter 3, verse 1, Nebuchadnezzar the king made an image of gold, whose height was 60 cubits and its width 6 cubits. That's about 90 feet tall and about 9 feet wide at the base. And he set it up in the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. And King Nebuchadnezzar sent word to gather together the satraps, the administrators, the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the magistrates, and all of the officials of the provinces to come to the dedication of the image which Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Who would be amongst those administrators that would have been gathered together to begin worshiping at this to display this golden image? And who else? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. If you look down at chapter 2, verse 49, and Daniel petitioned the king, and he set Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego over the affairs of the province of Babylon. So these would have been three young men who would have been required, invited, but yet required by the king to come and to this dedication. And you can imagine what this dedication would have been like. It would have been a lot of fanfare. There would have been a lot of musical instruments playing. There would likely have been sacrifices made. There would have been all kinds of pagan rituals going on in regards to dedicating this golden statue that Nebuchadnezzar had spent a great deal of money to build. This would have been something that would have been very, very costly to do. So he sets up this golden image in this plain of Dura, and he gathers all of the nobility and the bureaucrats to come, and he invites them to come to the dedication. But what does he say? In verse 4, it says, "And then a herald cried out, 'To you it is commanded, O peoples, nations, and languages.'" This is in reference to the fact that the empire at this time was made up of a great many conquered people. So there would have been people there from a great many nations that had been conquered by the Babylonians. So he says, "To you it is commanded, O peoples, nations, and languages, that at the time you hear the sound of the horn, the lute, or the flute, the harp, the lyre, and psaltery, in symphony with all kinds of music, you shall fall down and worship the golden image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. And whoever does not fall down and worship shall be cast immediately into the midst of a burning fiery furnace." This, to me, in reading this, it shows a great deal of the arrogance and really the childishness of this king. He was still not there. He had been convinced of his majesty, and he was convinced in his own mind of his majesty. And he felt that truthfully he could do whatever he wants. And at the end of our study tonight, you'll see where Daniel urges the king to quit doing some of the things that he's been doing. He urges him to break off some of the sins and iniquities that he was committing. This is one of them, to ask people to oppress people, to ask people to do things that were in opposition to the right thing, the righteous thing in which they were supposed to be living. So here's this command of the king. I want you to come and admire my vision, and if you don't do it immediately, you will be killed. It just shows an arrogance and a childishness on the part of King Nebuchadnezzar. In chapter 3, verse 15, it also shows his forgetfulness. Let's turn to 3:15 real quick. Now, at this point, of course, the music plays, everything goes on, and all of those who are in attendance do what? They bow down to this golden statue. They bow down to this golden image, except for who? The only three that we read of: Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These three young men. It's possible that Daniel was still at court, at Nebuchadnezzar's court, and he wasn't there, but it only mentions the three young men. Do they bow down? No, they refused to bow down. Likely they would not have made a big deal out of it. They just remained standing as opposed to bowing down. And what does he say? In let's go real quick. Let's go to chapter 3, verse 8. "Therefore at that time, certain Chaldeans came forward and accused the Jews. They spoke and said to King Nebuchadnezzar, 'O king, live forever.'" Once again, his majesty is continually proclaimed to him. He's taking it seriously. "You, O king, have made a decree that everyone who hears the sound of the horn, flute, harp, lyre, and psaltery, and symphony with all kinds of music shall fall down and worship the gold image. And whoever does not fall down and worship shall be cast in the midst of a burning fiery furnace. There are certain Jews whom you have set over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men, O king, have not paid due regard to you." So here they're tying their actions to the king. You see how they're framing their refusal to do what's been asked of them. They're not showing you, king, due diligence, due regard. They're not listening to you. They're disobeying you. No mention of they refuse because they have another god that they serve. They're not showing you the due regard that you are truly due as king of all you survey. So they're tying their refusal to worship back to King Nebuchadnezzar. "They do not serve your gods or worship the gold image which you have set up." Then Nebuchadnezzar, in rage and fury, gave the command to bring Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So they brought these men before the king. Nebuchadnezzar spoke, and he says to them, "Is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the gold image which I have set up? Now, if you are ready at the time you hear the sound of the horn, flute, harp, lyre, and psaltery, in symphony with all kinds of music, and you fall down and worship the image which I have made, good. But if you do not worship, you shall be cast immediately into the midst of a burning fiery furnace. And who is, here's the question, the million-dollar question. Who is the God that will deliver you from my hands? You see where Nebuchadnezzar has it flipped. Who is the God that will deliver you from my hands? He still hasn't recognized that the God the God that enabled Daniel to interpret his dream, the God that he even said, blessed be the God of Daniel. He still hasn't recognized that this is the God that these men serve. The God that was able to interpret that dream as the same God that's going to deliver them from his hands. They didn't need to worry about Nebuchadnezzar. That was not who, you know, you should fear the person who can do harm to the body, right? You fear the person who does harm to the body, but how much more should you fear the person who can deliver both body and soul to hell? Okay? So he hasn't quite come to that understanding yet about who these men serve. It's going to be pointed out to him very, very clearly here in just a few moments. But he asks this very specific question: who is the God that will deliver you out of my hands? In Daniel 2, verses 37 and 38 says, you, O king, are a king of kings, for the God of heaven has given you a kingdom, power, strength, and glory. And wherever the children of men dwell, or the beasts of the field, and the bird of the heaven, he has given them into your hand, and has made you ruler over them all. You are this head of gold. Daniel told him this, and he gives him all of the credit that's due. We remember that who sent Nebuchadnezzar to do what he did to the children of Israel? God did. God put him into place. But what happens? What if God can put someone into place? What can God do? He tears them down. He does that. He has done that. He will continue to do that. He will allow people to rise up through his providence. We talked about that this morning as well. Sometimes the good of the people, the good of God's people, is accomplished through God's providence in the form of suffering and even to the point of death. God's point for his lost children was not just to punish them. It was to refine them. It was to bring them back. It was to cause them to repent. He was going to deliver punishment on them, but he also told them this. He said, I will allow you to be defeated, but I will also bring you back. I'm going to bring you back. And sure enough, when King Cyrus gives his decree that the Jews could go back, who put King Cyrus into place in order for that to happen? God did. God did. So Daniel's telling him all these things, and he's taking them very seriously. So he believes himself still to be superior. He still doesn't realize that God, he says, the God who's the God that will deliver you out of my hands? It's the God that put him into place in the first place. And he understands that later on. Nebuchadnezzar does have that moment, that instance of clarity where he truly realizes who God is. And he makes this change. He does make this change. So he offers these three an opportunity to bow to the image. He gives them an opportunity. He says, if you do it, then good. If not, who is the God that will save you from my hand? Quickly then, let's think about this in regards to the idea of Nebuchadnezzar offering up a second chance. Does Satan quit after our first refusal? No. Does he ever give up? He may cease to attack us on a particular front when he realizes that we're not tempted by certain things. Does he cease to tempt us with those things? Maybe, maybe not. Sometimes he might try that tack again. But truthfully, once he realizes that a particular avenue of temptation is not working for us, he'll tempt us on another level, tempt us in another way. He'll find our weakness, and he exploits every weakness he possibly can. So does Satan quit tempting after the first refusal? No. How many times did he tempt Job? At least twice. At least twice he tempted Job. And then several times, even while he was discussing things with his four friends, Job was given the temptation, was tempted by his friends to do what? To say things. To what? Curse God, but they were tempting him to say things that were unrighteous, to deny his faith, to not acknowledge that he was in fact righteous before God. That's what they kept trying to say. You admit, Job, that you're in sin. Admit that you're in sin and that's why you are in the shape that you're in. And you refuse to do it. He said, I'm not going to do it because I know I'm not. I stand before God righteous. God has a reason for doing what he's doing to me, but I stand righteous before God. Sometimes it's just a simple matter of causing us to say something that would be unfruitful for God, causing us to say something that would be sinful, causing us to say something that would be untrue. So that's how he comes after us. And Nebuchadnezzar gives him another opportunity. He said, if you bow down, good. If you don't, I'm going to throw you into this furnace. And who's the God that can save you from my hand? Well, they refused. Real quick then, I said, how many times did he tempt Job? How many times did he tempt Joseph? How many times did he tempt Jesus? And we just read about the three temptations in the wilderness, but how many times was Jesus tempted other than that? I mean, God's people are always tried and tested. We always are. If we are not being tried and tested, then we're not Christians. We're not acting as Christians. Because if we're tried and we're tested, it's because we are doing the things that we're supposed to do. Our faith is in action. And when our faith is in action, we're going to be tried. We're going to be tempted. And the question is, how faithful can we remain under duress? Well, these three young men have been threatened with their lives. This is not a matter of a jail sentence. This is not a matter of being sold into slavery. This is a matter of, if you do not do this, I will kill you. And they remained faithful. They said, we don't have to answer you in this regard. We answer to one God. We answer to the God, they don't say this, but we answer to the God that put you in the position that you're in. And if he could put you in the position that you're in, he can deliver us from you. We're not, they're very cordial in their speech, but they're very dismissive of Nebuchadnezzar's claims of being able to harm them at all. We're not worried about you. If we die in the service of God, how many times have we said that? If we die in the service of God, all well and good. We're very cautious about saving our bodies. Once again, would you rather, if you're the one who can put your soul or your body to death, yes, but they're thinking, I don't want to die, Nebuchadnezzar. I don't want you to kill me, but we fear more the God that can destroy both our body and our soul. So they're cognizant of who they worship and their worship. They're very cognizant of their worship itself. He was asking them to do something that would have been blasphemous, to bow their knee to another God. Whether it was called a God or not, you're not supposed to worship any graven image at all. Even if they had said, they could have said, well, we can bow down and we'll just pretend like we're bowing to God. How many times have you heard people justify a sin by doing that? I'm going to go over here. I'm going to visit this denomination, and I'm just not going to do some of the things that they do that would be displeasing. I'm going to do all the things that I would normally do at the church, but I'm not going to do this. And we justify it doing that. Well, there's no difference. There's no difference. It would have been very easy for them to say that. They said, we will not bow down. It says that Nebuchadnezzar is furious. And it says even to the point that his countenance or his appearance was changed towards them. What does it mean by that? He had appointed them administrators of this province on Daniel's recommendation. He had appointed them to be these administrators of this province. He obviously saw something in them, and he saw something in their friend Daniel. They were there almost as a group of young men, and so he looked upon them kindly to the point that he was willing to put them in charge of a portion of his kingdom. This is that his appearance was changed toward them. He didn't look at them the same way anymore. He didn't look upon them with the same favor that he once did. Why? What difference would it have been if he said, "Listen, I understand that that I know where you come from. I know that you're a Jew. I know that you don't worship the people, these gods. That's okay. I'm going to let you do what you're wanting to do." What would have been? What could it have hurt had Nebuchadnezzar just let that part of his plan go away? It could have been the fact that if he did that, if they did that, then somebody else, then it's a snowball effect and nobody wants to bow to his golden image. What else? Okay. He wants respect for his authority. I think he saw this as a challenge to the golden head, so to speak. That was the intent for them, for not recognizing him as the man. He could not abide the fact that these young men would not do as he commanded them to do. In the military, do you get to refuse an order? You get to refuse a direct order. once. There are provisions for it, but they're with a very small window of what the kind of orders that you can refuse to carry out. They're a very small window. It has to be there's very strict criteria as to what kind of direct order you can refuse. So he sees this as they're refusing a direct order. It is a direct violation of my majesty, of my command, of my ability to be complete and total, have complete and total dominion over everything that I survey. So his attitude and his demeanor are changed, and they're altered towards these men. He didn't look upon them with favor anymore. I think many times we read this account, and it's almost like this happens in a 30-minute period of time, and it's not. This likely took place over several days, and and likely, as in the case of Daniel, he may have even thought twice about it. Now, do I really want to do this? But much like Pharaoh Pharaoh changed his mind, but then what did he do? He changed it back. God hardened his heart, and he went back, because several times he'd said, "Go, get out. I don't get these people need to get out of my land. I've had enough. And then over maybe a couple of days to think about it, all of a sudden his own arrogance and his own ego began to feed again. And all of a sudden the wise decision he had made to let them go, all of a sudden comes back. That ego comes back, and he refuses. He hardens his heart. So and then he refuses to let them go again. It's likely Nebuchadnezzar could have gone through the same issue. Think about it. You know who these people belong to. You know who they serve. It's the God that interpreted your dream. It's the God that made these men in better shape, superior shape than any men that you've had in your employ. And I you know what, I'm never. And then all of a sudden that ego comes back in, and he says, "No, I'm not going to." They defied me. He's like a child. They defied me, and they're going to pay for it with their lives. So what does he do at this point? He orders that the furnace be heated 7 times hotter than it normally was. And it's interesting, the idea of 7 being the number of completion, right? And the idea of the idea of numbers. I don't think that's necessarily what it means here, but he ordered it heated 7 times hotter. So basically, this furnace was as hot as it's going to get. And this was likely a furnace in this particular time frame in world history. This was likely more of a furnace that would have been used for manufacture or smelting metals or something like this. This was not a home furnace for heating the home. It was a working furnace, a blast furnace. We would understand. So he orders this thing be heated 7 times hotter than it normally was. As a matter of fact, he says that certain choice men from the army were commanded to bind these 3 young men, and as they throw them in, it was so hot that it actually killed the men that were throwing them in. It was so hot they couldn't get that. They had to get close enough to put them in the furnace, but when they got close enough, it killed them. Well, what happens to these 3 men? They're bound, clothes on, with cords. They fall down in the middle of the furnace, and then what happens? What occurs? Nebuchadnezzar goes to the edge as close as he dares, physically dares, and he looks down in there and he says, "Hold on, did we not cast 3 men down in there? But I see 4 men down in there, and one of them, what does it say? Looks like the Son of God." Okay, were Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego alone in that furnace? No, they were not. They were not. There was someone in there with them. And it says that they were walking around and talking. Walking around and talking. Is God's providence on display here yet again? Now remember, there's general providence, the providence that comes on all of us, both the believer and the unbeliever. But there's also a special providence that God shows towards his people. And sometimes that providence takes place. In the old days, it took place in the form of miracles in many cases, where God would miraculously cause things to occur that would benefit his people. And this is one of those times. It's providence. God is not allowing these young men to be harmed by something that by all logic and by all science and by all everything, any natural law, these 3 young men would be dead. But God's providence comes on display, and God providentially delivers them from this thing. And after a while, what happens? They allow the furnace to cool down again because they can't get up. I mean, they can't climb up straight walls. So they allow the furnace to cool down a little bit. No telling how long that took. So this furnace cools down and they pull them out. They pull them out.
I have a question.
Yes.
Where was Daniel in this what was that?
It doesn't say.
Yeah.
It doesn't say where Daniel was. I imagine Daniel was keeping track of his three friends, and it was probably likely word had come to him. It doesn't say that. I don't want to. It would all be conjecture on our part to say Daniel was standing there right with him, waiting on him to come out, and he was. But I would imagine Daniel keeps up with his friends and probably knows what's going on, but it doesn't say what, if anything, he was particularly doing. But I imagine he was pretty. If he did know about it, of course, would Daniel be worried about his three friends? It's one of those things. Daniel was going to be on pins and needles. No, remember, Daniel had complete and total faith in God. Daniel's faith in God was complete, and Daniel knew the God that he served, and he knew that one of two things: one, God was either going to deliver these three young men, or his three friends will have died in the service of God, and at which point they needn't worry about anything else ever again. So there's one of two things going on. I would imagine it's like anything else. When we have a family member that's going into the hospital and it's a minor outpatient procedure, are we still concerned? Sure. You're always concerned. But was Daniel worried? No, I don't think Daniel was worried. I don't think he would have been worried. But once again, that's strictly conjecture on my part. I just knowing these men the way that the Bible presents them, I think we can honestly say that Daniel would have been. Daniel was willing to die for the sake of God, so it was not a concern for him. Okay, back in the back. Okay. Oh, yes, was a good question. Yes.
I'm just thinking, Daniel was not accused by the Chaldeans.
Mm-hmm.
Only Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego.
Mm-hmm.
Daniel had saved the Chaldeans' lives.
Yes.
And maybe, I don't know, we don't know from the scripture here, but maybe they didn't accuse him because they owed him in a way.
It could very well be it. They were the wise men. The wise men of the wise Chaldeans were their heads were on the chopping block before this with the vision that the dream that the king had. And Daniel said, as a matter of fact, don't do just before you go around killing people, before you start chopping off the heads of wise men. Hold on a couple of minutes. Let me, I can make the dream known. So it could have been, once again, it's conjecture, but it does build a very, very vivid portrait of what's going on. This is a rich, layered story that's happening. It's, many times we look at the books, especially of the Old Testament, and we see pictures. It's almost like a series of vignettes rather than a tapestry that's going on. We see individual portraits instead of a photo album. So when you see something like that going on, it's entirely possible that these men just did not want to accuse Daniel because they felt they owed him something. But we also see where later on they do accuse him. They do find a way to try to bring shame and reproach on Daniel. It's an unusual thing in that, or it's not unusual. It's a mystery in many ways as to how things were happening during this time. But let's look at Hebrews chapter 11, verse 35. This is brought up even in, remember, the old is in the new revealed. Hebrews chapter 11, verse 35. What does it say? And what more shall I say? What more shall I say? For the time will fail me to tell of Gideon and Barak and Samson and Jephthah, also of Daniel and Samuel and the prophets, who through faith subdued kingdoms, worked righteousness, obtained promises, stopped the mouths of lions, quenched the violence of fire, escaped the edge of the sword, out of weakness were made strong, became valiant in battle, turned to flight the armies of the aliens. Women received their dead raised to life again. Others were tortured, not accepting deliverance, that they might obtain a better resurrection. Words would fail to tell of all these people that were, but here we see very specific. Who else would he be talking about stopping the mouths of lions and escaping violence by fire? Daniel stopped the mouths of the lion. Well, God stopped the mouths of the lion. Daniel was there, and through his faith, God delivered him. But quench the violence of fire? Could have been it had to have been talking about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These people escaped because of what? Their faith in their God. They had ultimate and utter faith in God to deliver them for what they said. They told him that. We don't serve you, king. We don't have to answer you. We answer to the God. We answer to Jehovah God. And he's going to find that out very quickly. So these three, through their faith, quenched the violence of fire. And their faith produced something as well. Look at the statement in verse 26. In verse 26 in chapter 3. Then Nebuchadnezzar went near the mouth of the burning fiery furnace and spoke, saying, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of who? The Most High God. Notice his language has changed somewhat. The Most High God, come out and come here. And then they came out from the midst of the fires. And the satraps, administrators, governors, and the king's counselors gathered together, and they saw these men on whose bodies the fire had no power. The hair of their head was not singed, nor were their garments affected, and the smell of fire was not on them. Then Nebuchadnezzar spoke, saying, Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who sent his angel. So he acknowledges he acknowledges their God, for one, and he acknowledges that their God sent an angel to be with them. He delivered his servants who trusted in them, and they have frustrated the king's word and yielded their bodies that they should not serve nor worship any god except their own God. Nebuchadnezzar is making a statement that people today even have a hard time acknowledging. And this is the most powerful man, likely the most powerful man in the world at this time. I mean, he commanded a huge territory and many men of war. And here he is acknowledging here that they serve the Most High God. There's nothing else above it. And this God sent his angel to protect these men. Therefore, and this is important, therefore I make a decree. Now, decree is an important thing. What's a decree? What's considered a decree? It's a proclamation. It's basically a verbal proclamation, a verbal statute. He says, I make a decree that any people, nation, or language which speaks anything amiss against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be cut in pieces, and their houses shall be made an ash heap, because there is no other God who can deliver like this. You notice here he says there's no other God. So he still has not yet come to that understanding about God being God. There is no other God. So he's acknowledging that there are other gods, but has he ever seen his gods ever perform anything like this? No. Why? Because they don't exist. They don't exist. So no, I've never seen any other God that can do something like this. But he still is not yet to that full state of proclamation in his trust in God, Jehovah God. So then he promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. Now think about this. When he makes this decree, any people, nation, or language that speaks anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be torn limb from limb, and their houses laid in ruins. Do we see here God's providence yet again on display? What was happening? Why were these men even away from their lands in the first place? Their homeland had been invaded, and it had been, at least this is the first carrying away. There was going to be another one later on, but their kingdom, their nation is lying in ruins, and all the best and the brightest are gone. What does that leave their people open to? Attacks from other people, right? Here, Nebuchadnezzar set out a decree. This affords the Jews at least some measure of protection. So God's providence is yet again on display in regards to protecting and delivering up the people that serve him, God's children, God's people. So decrees were binding, and they were published in all corners of the kingdom. And as a protectorate of Babylon, the kingdom would have had a bulwark against some sort of an attack. This would have been something that would have been beneficial to them. Was it always enforced? No, but it was at least a symbolic gesture on behalf of Jehovah God by Nebuchadnezzar, the very God that put him into place in the first place. We'll go just one more thing. At this point, chapter 4, in chapter 4, the book goes to a first-person narrative, and where Nebuchadnezzar gives his account of the second dream from God. This is the dream of the tree. We're going to read that, and then we're going to finish up class tonight. But I encourage you, read chapters 4 and 5 for next week. I want you to read chapters 4 and 5 for next week. All right, Nebuchadnezzar gives his account of the second dream from God. And I'll just read the dream exactly as it's written. I, Nebuchadnezzar, chapter 4, verse 4. I, Nebuchadnezzar, was at rest in my house and flourishing in my palace. I saw a dream which made me afraid, and the thoughts on my bed and the visions of my head troubled me. Remember, these visions are coming from God. These are not just bad dreams on his part. It's like Scrooge, and he says, is this a piece of fat or a bit of gristle that's caused these dreams to come upon me? No, these dreams are coming from God Almighty. Therefore, I issued a decree to bring in all the wise men of Babylon before me, that they might make known to me the interpretation of the dream. Then the magicians, the astrologers, the Chaldeans, and the soothsayers came in, and I told them the dream, but they did not make known to me its interpretation. But at last, Daniel came before me. This name is Belteshazzar, according to the name of my God. In him is the spirit of the holy God. And I told the dream before him, saying, Belteshazzar, chief of the magicians, because I know that the spirit of the holy God is in you, and no secret troubles you. Explain to me the visions of my dream that I have seen and its interpretation. These were the visions of my head while I was on my bed. I was looking, and behold, a tree in the midst of the earth, and its height was great. The tree grew and became strong. Its height reached to the heavens, and it could be seen to the ends of all the earth. Its leaves were lovely, and its fruit abundant, and in it was food for all. The beasts of the field found shade under it. The birds of the heavens dwelt in its branches, and all flesh was fed from it. I saw the visions of my head while on my bed, and there was a watcher, a holy one, coming down from heaven. He cried aloud and said thus, chop down the tree and cut off its branches. Strip off its leaves and scatter its fruit. Let the beasts get out from under it and the birds from its branches. Nevertheless, leave the stump and roots in the earth, bound with a band of brass or iron and bronze, and the tender grass of the field. Let it be wet with the dew of heaven, and let him graze with the beasts on the grass of the earth. Let his heart be changed from that of a man. Let him be given the heart of a beast. Let 7 years pass, or 7 times pass over him. This decision is by the decree of the watchers, and the sentence by the word of the holy ones, in order that the living may know that the Most High rules in the kingdom of men, give it to whomever he will, and sets it over the lowest of men. So Nebuchadnezzar gives Daniel this dream and asks him to interpret it. Now, Daniel understands. God gives him all understanding of this vision, this dream, and it says that his heart was troubled. He wasn't quite sure. He knew the answer, but it says, he's almost scared to tell Nebuchadnezzar what the dream means. And Nebuchadnezzar puts his mind at rest. He said, don't worry about it. I just need to know. I need to hear it. I'm not going to take retribution against you. I'm not going to kill the messenger because of the message. But you have to tell me what this dream means. And Daniel does interpret it for him. And it's through this dream and it's coming to fruition that Nebuchadnezzar finally comes to a true understanding of the God whom Daniel serves and acknowledges Daniel's God as the God of heaven, as the God of heaven. So next week we'll get into that dream and we'll talk about its interpretation and how that dream actually came to be. It came to pass as all the dreams and visions of God come to pass. But we'll end there and then we'll take it up again next week. We want to offer up the Lord's invitation. If there is anyone here who is in need of public repentance, if you have sin in your life and you need to repent of that and make your request known to the congregation, we want you to do that. We want to pray for you and with you and help you become the child of God that you want to be and what God wants you to be. If there's one here that has not put on Christ in baptism, we invite you to do that tonight as well. You cannot be saved unless you are baptized into the blood of Christ. If you have any need, please come while we stand and while we sing.